So skip ahead a few more years to about 550 years ago. We have the age of print that gets created. So if we think back, right, writing is more efficient than other forms of communication, but it's still really slow to reproduce. It took monks years to copy books, and also changes were constantly being made to the text. Sometimes on purpose, sometimes on accident, right? But you can imagine how a monk living in a monastery copying the Bible, drinking lots of beer, might decide to make some changes to the text as he's copying it, or write some stuff in the footnotes, or he just reads something wrong and writes it down incorrectly. So all of these things lead writing to be not as standard as future developments. In 1440, the Gutenberg press is invented. This allows for pages to be created using alphabetic blocks, right? So they would create a page of text all together using blocks. They would put ink on those blocks, and then they would stamp those blocks onto pages. So this allows you to standardize the text. So where monks were constantly making mistakes or adding new information to it, once you had a page typeset, which really meant you had all the type on the page, what you had was what you got, right? You standardize the text, and no matter how many copies you make, you're not going to get mistakes from that. This also allows for the mass creation of books, which is a huge development for education throughout the world. Here's a quick chart of book output in Europe, 1450 to 1800. As you look on the left, in 1450 in the 15th century, not many books being made at all. And you can see there's a huge jump to about 200 million books from the 15th century, which is basically zero or as few books as could be copied, to 200 million in 100 years. And then in another 100 years, you jump from 200 million to 550 million. And then in the 18th century, you're all the way up to about 1 billion books being printed in Europe. So you can see how the printing created a vast amount of information that didn't exist before. Now the steam press was invented about 200 years ago. This allows for even faster production of books. So you had the Gutenberg press, the first kind of press that was made. It could make 240 impressions per hour, so that basically means 240 different pages per hour. In 18, you had the Koenig steam press being invented, and this was basically using mass production techniques to print pages. So instead of having to actually, with the Gutenberg press, you would have to put your page down on a piece of paper that you wanted the text that down, and basically screw something down until it tightened, and then you would get your impression, untighten that, change the page out. So it was relatively faster than writing, but it was still pretty slow. Well, the steam press, you could do 2,400 of those per hour, so it's about 10 times as fast. Now, the invention of the steam press really increases literacy worldwide. So the invention of the printing press did that, and also the steam press. Basically, if you think about it, if you didn't have books, it would be difficult to learn how to read. However, if you have a lot of books and they're cheap to make, it becomes a lot easier to learn how to read. In addition, this also increases the speed at which ideas can spread throughout society, right? Because if it took a monk, 50 days to make a book, the steam press, basically, you can make the same book in a couple hours, maybe even less time. This is just a quick chart to kind of illustrate how literacy increased due to the fact that you have the printing press, you start to have books in circulation. So if you look back in 1720 in France, about 65% of the population was illiterate. Now if we follow this down, right, you can see this strong negative trend, and it gets even stronger after the invention of the printing press. So in just a little over 100 years, we went from 65% illiterate to less than 10% illiterate. That's kind of an impressive jump, and it's largely due to the fact that people actually had something to read at this point. So the age of mass communication, we say, began about 100 years ago, and I'm just going to cover some quick inventions that really kind of led to this. The invention of the telegraph happened in 1832. The first message that was sent by telegraph was "What hath God wrought?" And this was basically the first time that standardized messages could move faster than a horse or a ship. So if you think back, prior to the invention of the telegraph, if you wanted to send a message, the fastest way you could do that would be by giving it to someone on a horse or basically putting it on a steamship and sending it across the ocean. This basically meant that if you wanted to send a message from the US to Europe, it took weeks. However, now with the invention of the telegraph in 1832, you have messages basically going cross country faster than, or as fast as electricity can carry them. Now, this creates all new things that we didn't even think about before. So, if you think about how fast information can flow at this point in time, this creates the need for standardized time. So, just a quick example, prior to the invention of the telegraph, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., and New York City were all on different times, basically. It was all determined by what time the sun was high in the sky. So 12 noon in New York City actually happened before 12 noon in Washington, D.C., which happened before 12 noon in Philadelphia. So you had all of these cities that are basically within, very close to each other being on different times. Well, with the invention of the telegraph, you start to need standardized time because if it closes at 5 p.m., if a store closes at 5 p.m. in New York City and I need to send them a message from Washington, D.C., I need to know that my 5 p.m. is the same as theirs. So you can see how the invention of the telegraph kind of creates all these problems and creates all these opportunities that didn't exist before. With the invention of the telegraph, you start to have futures markets, stock markets, and better trading, better interest rates, all sorts of information, better planning nationwide. So in 1832, we developed that ability to send information faster than humans can carry it. In 18, we invent the telephone, which that allows for us to send and receive audio through wires. So rather than just sending Morse code like you would do with the telegraph, you can actually speak to someone else and hear them with the invention of the telephone. In 1897, we had the invention of radio, so that allows us to broadcast and receive audio without wires, so you can do it through the air, which increases the speed with which it can travel. And then in 1895, we have the invention of film, so that's when you can start actually seeing things. You can actually reproduce moving images. Big kind of game changer there. All right, so what's new about mass communication? Why is it so different than previous forms of communication? Well, first off, the skill set that's required to consume mass communication is really low. There's nothing that you need to learn to interpret communication as long as you have a language, which basically all humans have language. And you now have the ability to send images over the airwaves. And basically anyone can interpret the images. There was some research that was done in the 80s using uncontacted tribes in Africa, and they wanted to know if basically when we watch movies or watch TV, is there some kind of skill set that we have to learn to interpret images, or is it just kind of a natural process that takes place? And based on this research, they were able to determine that, it's a natural process that takes place. It just taps into something innately human, and we're able to understand those moving images and television shows without developing any kind of skill sets. So the skill sets required is really low. If you compare this to reading, it's completely different. It takes you years to learn how to read, but young children who can read can watch television and basically get some understanding from it. In addition, you start to have really standardized messages. So you can start to have content being the same for everyone. Prior to the telegraph, right, you had tons of local newspapers. You didn't even really have national newspapers because there wasn't any way to get the information across very quickly. However, with the invention of satellite information, etc., we really start to be able to send messages out very quickly. And those messages can be standardized so that you get the exact same message in Washington, D.C., as if you were living in Los Angeles. prior to mass communication, there wasn't an ability to send out these types of standardized messages other than books. The boundaries of space and time actually become meaningless due to the invention of mass communication, right? So we have the invention of satellite communication in the 50s and 60s. It's really kind of a game changer there. You can start to send information on the world very, very quickly. And basically the speed of exchange of information becomes instantaneous. So as soon as information is created, it gets out into the world through the World Wide Web now, right? If you compare that to the book publication process, it could take years for your books or new ideas to get spread through books, and maybe no one would even pick them up. However, today with the exchange rate or the exchange speed as being as quickly as it is, you really see information spreading very, very quickly, which allows for new scientific developments to happen very quickly. And information to get a lot faster and to change actually people's lives in a positive way or in a negative way. All right, so the last slide, what's new about mass communication? Well, if we look back in time, change is coming faster and faster. So it took about 194,000 years to go from spoken language to writing. Right, so spoken language came on the scene about 200,000 years ago. Writing didn't come onto the scene until about 6,000 years ago. So 194,000 years just to go from spoken language to writing. All right, well, if we look at writing, it took about 5,500 years to get to books, printed books, that is. That's an exceedingly large amount of time. It took 400 years to get to mass communication from books. And then things start to really, really speed up, right? So it took 194 years to go from spoken language to writing. It took 400 years to go from books to mass communication. It only took 50 years to go from mass communication to get to satellites. It only took 40 years to get to broadband communication, which was available in everyone's home. And then 7 years ago, if you think about it, we didn't actually have YouTube. So this class would basically be impossible just 7 years ago. So things are really, really speeding up in terms of mass communication. And the question that I want to leave you guys with is, what will the next 100 years bring? If you think about it, if you had told someone, 100 years ago that we would have computers and information spreading the way it did, and you would be able to take courses from a college from great distances and actually be in contact with your professors, people would kind of think that was a crazy idea. So if you can kind of think ahead, right, what's 100 years in the future, what's that going to look like? Well, that ends this lecture. I hope this was interesting for you. I hope you learned some new stuff. But this is kind of just a background to give us some idea about why communication and why mass communication is so important and so different from other forms of communication.